Thanks everyone for sticking with us. It's been a long and full day, really quite amazing set of attendees and topics. We've talked today with people actually writing code down in the products. We've talked with people who are delivering it in the classroom. We've talked to people who are delivering at the national level. One of the areas that probably doesn't get enough attention is the states, which have quite frankly been some of the real movers if you look at the actual implementation of the blended learning marketplace. And we have with us today two of the leaders. Still not, I'm sorry. Check, check, no? Not getting me, no? Are there any technologists in the room? Check, check. There we go. All right, there we go, thank you. So we have a couple of the real leaders in that middle ground and one of the most successful grounds in the fight, the states, Tom Luna and Jeff Mao. So as all of you probably know, two of the real shining stars in terms of state action on this issue have been Idaho and Maine. What I'm going to ask each of these leaders to comment upon is sort of the state of the state. In other words, where you are today, because I think often I find people don't realize just how much progress has been made. So let me start with Maine. We'll go east to west here to start. But Jeff, maybe you could step back and just give us a 2-minute, where are you as a state now on the issue of educational technology and your particular role within it?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with just kind of following on some of Jim's comments on the success of E-rate. I think actually it was invented by Olympia Snow of Maine. And that's really where a lot of this for us began, when we were able to start leveraging the E-rate and then created our own local Maine E-rate, which we call the Maine Technology Education Access Fund. It basically mirrors E-rate, so on our phone bills there's two little fees. And the local funds collect with the Maine Public Utilities Commission, which then, between the E-rate and the Maine fund, we 100% fund broadband for all schools and libraries in the state of Maine. And we've been doing that since the late 90s. So today, in fact, we were just discussing this with our schools, that they don't actually know how much their internet costs because they've never paid for internet, ever. And so they don't realize how much money we invest for them on their behalf to provide them broadband internet. And today, I think we have arguably one of the best broadband networks in the country. So sitting on top of that network then in the early 2000s are, at the time, if we talk about bipartisan things, our independent governor, Angus King, who's now one of our senators, conceived of this idea of providing a laptop to all of the kids in Maine and managed to move that through legislation. And we began that program in 2002 and started deploying laptops to every 7th grade student in the state. And then following on, we added 7th and 8th. And now,
why 7th and 8th?
So we began in the middle grades for a couple of reasons. One of them was a recognition, just simply looking at kind of test scores and achievement, that it was somewhere in that time span when things started to, the wheels start to fall off, right? And I think for those of you who've taught middle school, you kind of know this is where mathematics class goes from arithmetic to math, right? To problem solving, to application. And so lots of kids who did really well in elementary school in mathematics class, you know, their parents say, oh, my kid's great at math. And they could compute like nobody's business, but then when they were asked to apply, they would start to struggle, right? And so that's when a lot of these different subject areas, I think that it gets more complex. And so we recognize this is a good time for us to come in and try and make a change. Frankly, the decision between 7 and 8 was just purely pragmatic. All but one school district in the state had 7th and 8th graders in the same building. And so if we had gone 6 to 8, we would have had to build like twice as many wireless networks. And in 2002, wireless networks were not common. So as you can imagine, when we said we're going to put a wireless network in all of our middle schools, most of the industry people said, well, you can't do that. It's not possible. You're crazy. And we even paid a high-priced consultant to look into it, and he told us it can't be done. And we said, whatever, we'll do it anyway. And you know, history shows we did it, and it's been just fine. So that's where we started with 7th and 8th. You know, fast forward to today, the program has now been through 4 major revisions, so 4 refreshes. It's been through 3 different governors, an independent, a Democrat, and a Republican. It's been through 10 years or 5 different legislatures. So it is truly not a political issue. And in Maine, I have lots of teachers who've said to me every time we get to a refresh, you know, if you take this program away, I'm quitting teaching. I can't go back. You know, and so I think that's a lot of the proof in the pudding. So today we are at 100% of our middle schools have been one-to-one for over a decade. And over half of our high schools are one-to-one. So every student in all of those schools gets a device. We have wireless networks in all those schools, and then every one of those schools is connected to our statewide broadband network. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We've affected every single student through the last 2 years of graduating college kids. So the kids from grade 7 all the way through seniors in college and the last 2 graduating classes all participated in this program. So we've now affected an entire generation of children in Maine having gone through the program and having had this access of ubiquity and this notion that every student gets this device and takes it home by statute or by policy at the state level. So we tell a school, if you want to participate, you must let the kid take the computer home. You can't hold it back at home, at the school, because we know that change doesn't occur, right? And a lot of this is just based on simple pragmatic realities, right? If the devices don't go home, teachers say, well, I've only got 50 minutes to do anything. It's not enough time. Kids, put that away. Let's just pull out the books, do the same old thing. I think where we're at today, our biggest challenge now is the notions of providing broadband, adequate wireless coverage, devices with warranties and repairs, good software, support, all of those things has become rather mundane for us. The real challenge has been digital content. And because I think what we've seen is over the last decade, we've been too far out ahead of the curve. So the publishing industry, the content creators, all of those people have not really gotten to a point where, as has been discussed all today, there isn't really a market for people like Maine. Right? We're too small of a space to constitute a market to say, can you conceive for me, can you create for me content that really leverages digital in a one-to-one fashion, that recognizes that kids will go home with this at night, they will be able to play with this 24/7 through the weekend for hours on end, as opposed to 40 minutes in a computer lab once a week. Right? So that's really where we are today. I think we've solved for our own purposes a lot of the kind of deployment issues. How do we procure things? How do we deploy that kind of stuff? How do we provide it in a supportable way? Ongoing and consistent professional development for teachers. But the challenge is the content piece, which is holding back some of our faculty who are still kind of stuck to their books. But lots of other teachers who have gone off and just kind of created their own. One of the things we drove by, I think it was last night, just by the museum right here in DC, and on their website, there's a little link. It says, today's headlines or today's front page or something. If you go to that website, it's been used by social studies teachers across the state for years since its inception. That's one of their new pieces of curriculum, right? They simply visit that link, so the day Obama was first elected, they went to that page and said, hey, kids, look at the front pages of the newspapers around the world. What do they say and why? Very simple, right? You don't need a fancy curriculum, but that's the conversation that needs to be had. How is this being presented in China? How is this being presented in Europe? Right? How is it being presented in the United States from state to state? Is there a difference from state to state, city to city, place to place? And again, so digital content can come in lots of different forms. And what we found is our teachers have been very, very flexible in kind of just creating something out of nothing. I'm sure it probably wasn't the museum's initial idea that that's how their website would be used, but we have teachers using it every day like that. And it's been really very powerful.
Tom, tell me the Idaho story, kind of where you are.
I'll tell you where we're at and kind of how we got here. Just I'll stick to the high notes. But you mentioned the word fight, and it can be a fight, and it can be it can bruise
Tell
your.
us about the Luna bill.
Yeah, the Luna laws, I think,
Laws,
is
yeah.
what they were referred to as. But let me tell you what started our movement quite a few years after Maine, and I really appreciate Jeff and the state of Maine and all the assistance they've given Idaho and other states, because you have plowed new ground, and it's been very helpful as we've gone forward. Idaho's a unique state. We not only look at Washington, but we look at the Bay Area and we think, what's wrong with those places, right? I mean, we're just a unique state. We're surrounded by 6 other states in one country. We're 500 miles from north to south and almost 500 miles east to west. But we only have 1.5 million people. Over 60% of our state is owned by the federal government and another 20% by the state and local governments. So about 83% of our state is owned by government. We have 115 school districts, 282,000 students. The average, about 50% of our school districts have less than 600 students. So we deal with a lot of parts of Idaho that are, and we have a great football team that plays on a blue turf, got to say that, all right? But we have, our challenge is we have so many of our students that are in rural, isolated parts of the state. And when we looked at how we were going to provide equal access and opportunity, we knew that the current model of delivering education wouldn't work no matter how much money you spent. We were not going to get an Algebra 2 teacher, a calculus teacher, a foreign language teacher in every high school in Idaho. That model wasn't going to work no matter how much you spent because the number of students in the classroom. So we realized that the proper implementation of technology was going to provide that equal access and opportunity. So about 4 years ago, we started on this path of connecting every one of our schools to broadband, high-speed connectivity, connect them to each other and connect them to our colleges and universities. It's called the Idaho Education Network. We own the fiber, we manage it, we pay for it. Our schools know what it was costing them. So they see a lot of value in the Idaho Education Network because they know the money it is saving them, and that's a benefit to us. At least one classroom in every high school has a flat screen TV and the cameras and microphones so that students have access to not only the great teachers in their school, but any great teacher in any other school in Idaho. We passed a law that allows students to earn up to a year's worth of college credits paid for by the state before they graduate from high school. Well, that's a great opportunity, but if I live in a small remote part of Idaho, how am I going to get access to those courses while I'm a high school student? So this connectivity, creating those programs created the need for the proper implementation of technology. At the end of, or by March, every one of our high schools will be a full wireless environment. And we are finishing the phase of connecting every one of our middle schools and grade schools to this broadband connectivity. It's all capable of video streaming, so it's the right speed, and the right capacity. And now many of our school districts are experimenting with one-to-one. We push out a considerable amount of money for districts to pursue technology initiatives one-to-one. Some are experimenting with bring your own device. I'm kind of curious how that's going to play out with multiple platforms and security types and filtering type issues. So that's where we're at with the connectivity. I will tell you that it was a $45 million lift to connect every one of our high schools to the Idaho Education Network and build the Idaho Education Network. Because of E-rate, all but $9 million of that was funded by E-rate, right? We were able to use some state dollars and some foundation dollars and leverage that to build a $45 million infrastructure with a small amount of state and charitable donations. So that's where we're currently at as far as connectivity and infrastructure.
The question for both of you as leaders, perhaps a little bit ahead of the rest of the country. If we were having a beer or a glass of wine one night and you were laying your hair down and basically answering the question of what happened that you didn't expect, what problems should we expect on a national level, and are they money problems, political problems, technology problems, or people problems that were toughest for you?
I think, interestingly, we just finished our fourth kind of refresh of our program, which involved then a very large procurement process. And this time through, we made a slight change in that we decided we would do a procurement that every state could leverage if they chose to. So we worked with a couple other states and did a consortia cooperative purchasing agreement. So at this stage, any state, including right now Sugar-Salem in Idaho, is leveraging this contract to be able to implement a one-to-one solution. And one of the things that we built into this was this idea that a state could use this contract and purchase equipment and services for their schools. What I didn't realize fully was the vast majority of states don't have the legislative authority to do that, which I just found kind of odd. I think there were a lot of policies that exist in Maine that we just simply had and we're very lucky to have, and we've leveraged them ever since. So we are legislatively, statutorily allowed to purchase goods and services on behalf of schools and municipalities if it's in the best interest of the schools and the state. We're allowed to do those kinds of things so that we can then affect purchasing at a large scale. And that's how we do our broadband purchasing, that's how we've done the device purchasing and all the services. And I think that was one of the things that going into this multi-state collaborative, we didn't realize was going to be such a challenge for other states. As I talked to my peers, they say, oh, this is great. Oh, but I can't do that. Yeah.
And if you're calling Tom's team and you're saying, hey, I can deliver one-to-one connectivity, great devices, what price can you do it for if he joins your cooperative?
So right now, the prices vary, and of course, there's a lot of different caveats. So what we did is we built a multi-tiered structure so that it recognized that, for example, for a state like Maine that has a pre-existing program that's been going for many years, and there's lots of different things in place, there's state funding behind it. At that price point, we're putting today an iPad in the hands of students and a MacBook Air plus an iPad into the hands of their teachers at $217 a year. So we think that's a pretty good price because it's the software, it's the hardware, it's the support, the repairs, the warranties, professional development, replacements, all of these different pieces. We can do an
How does that compare to a textbook budget at one of your schools?
So high school principals have reported to me their average textbook spending annually can be anywhere from $50 to $120 a year per pupil. And so it's not that much more. I think at some point in time, that 217 number will continue to come down, hopefully. And sooner or later, other states and other places will start to see these numbers and say, okay, this is a no-brainer. We should be doing this. I mean, you know, one of the ways to look at this is simply if you take the cost of a MacBook Air and an iPad mini and add it up, it's more than 217 times the 4 years. It's a 4-year program. So you're actually getting more equipment than the 217. Of course, the iPad's a little bit less, and it all evens out in the wash. But it is an exceedingly good price. We can put a laptop, an HP laptop in the hands of students for $254. And we can put a MacBook Air in the hands of kids for $273. So there are different price points. And these are the prices that are available to states like Maine that have pre-existing programs. The prices are slightly higher for states that aren't going yet, and that's just because there's initial startup costs. But part of the reason that we created the multi-tier structure was to give states a political pathway to grow into this. So at the highest price, so to speak, is what we would call a Tier 3 purchase. And that's simply where the state says to its schools, if you want to buy off this contract, go ahead and do it individually by yourselves. And so the vendors know, okay, this is a much smaller scale project. There isn't state funding behind it, but I'll work with that local municipality, local district. And hopefully, if enough districts in a state start to do this, they can start to band together and say to their state, hey guys, if you would just aggregate the purchase for us, the contract says that immediately we can save $20 a kid a year. That's a pretty easy sell, I think, to a legislature. To say, hey, if you just pass a law that lets us purchase on behalf of schools, look how much money we can save these 23 districts that are already doing this program. Right? Once you get that going, then again, you'll probably get more schools coming on board. And then it's only a couple more steps before the schools say, hey, if you just basically take the money out of my state subsidy check and pay for it for me, we call it state funding, now it's a Tier 1 project, all of a sudden that's where we get to the 217 number. So we tried to design it to give states a way to start moving down this path because we know one of the great challenges of this has been the political challenges of moving this thing through the system. Yeah. I think we were very fortunate that when we began, Angus King simply was one of those politicians who didn't really, I guess you could say he didn't really care about how much political capital he was going to spend to make it happen because he knew it was simply the right thing to do. And I think that's kind of been the magic of Angus King. That was why, for example, in the last elections, he was the first race called in the country. I got home at about 5:30, turned on the news, and they said, yeah, it's too early to tell, none of the poll numbers are in. However, in the state of Maine, we can call Senator Angus, Angus King has won the Senate race because he's so wildly popular in Maine because he just does the right thing, and it's not partisan politics. It's, he's just very pragmatic.
Tom, speaking about trying to do the right thing and problems that you accomplished or you ran into along the way, what were the 2 or 3 problems you'd share with the crowd that you ran into that we may see ahead of us?
Well, yeah, just some quick background. We took an approach that coming out of a recession, and we were one of most states that actually had to cut some of our funding for education. First time the state had ever done that. But coming out of the recession, how are we going to, we needed an education system that could educate more students at a higher level but with limited resources. And we were convinced the current system could not do that, right? It just depends on tens of millions of new dollars every year just to continue to do what you've done in the past. So, I can't sign one bill. I can't vote on one bill. It is a political process in Idaho. And so we worked with our legislature and our governor, and we did pass very comprehensive reform in 2011, and with quite a bit of resistance when there was marches going on in the Capitol and in Wisconsin and Indiana and stuff. The same thing was happening in Idaho, but we just kind of flew under the radar, it seemed. But after we passed these laws, which were very comprehensive, they dealt with reforming our labor laws, implementing a very comprehensive pay-for-performance plan for all of our teachers. And then the third bill focused heavily on investments in technology. What we decided was that we not only had to look for new sources of funding, but we had to be willing to spend at least some of the funding we currently have differently. And what we talked about was shifting 1% of our state budget and shift it towards technology and move it away from other areas that we were spending it on. That proved to be very, very controversial because it was easy for the opponents to say, you know, you're taking money that should be spent on teachers, if you will, and you're spending it on technology and it's going into for-profit companies' pockets. And it was a very, very successful campaign. They managed a referendum and they overturned all three of our laws, right? And it was very disruptive.
And the key point they overturned it on was the for-profit companies
Yeah,
taking away from teachers. What did they hit you hardest on?
Well, it was a very successful campaign because the three laws, each one of them were very comprehensive. They had many points in them, and it was easy to pick just 1 or 2 points of each law and then just hammer and hammer and hammer those. But that was the process we used to get it through the legislature. The legislature isn't going to pass 30 or 40 reform laws in one session. So we created 3 packages and we got them through there. But just the idea that we were going to spend some of our current funding differently became a huge obstacle, and then it was easy for people to claim that this was an attempt to privatize education, and you know, they ran TV commercials where they showed kids in their front yard with a laptop and they get up and run away and the sprinklers come on, and they show a kid pouring a Coke on a laptop and a kid dropping it. I mean, this was a $4 million effort in Idaho when you can be governor for $1.2 million. I mean, it was an all-out campaign, and they rolled us. Yeah. And you know, now there was mistakes on both sides. So you know, I'm just trying to explain to you that there is a political side to this, and you have to make sure that the staging and the timing and the rollout of this it's well thought through, because it's not just a legislative issue. You do have to be able to convince parents and all of the education community, the teachers' unions, the superintendents, school boards, all of them, of the value of this. I do find that the biggest resistance isn't with kids. This is an adult problem. This is an adult issue, this resistance. I can't tell you the number of students that come into my office or I go into their classrooms and they just scratch their heads. They do not understand this debate that we're having about getting technology into the classroom, right? Because this is the world that they live in. And it's only when they're in school that they do not have the access to all the information in the world. And you remember when we went to school, we went there because that's where we went to get access to the most information, because it was in the school library and it's what teachers knew and could share with us. Well, today, in too many cases, when you go to school, that's when you have least access to the most information and knowledge, because you're limited to what's in the library, and most teachers don't have the tools to access that world of information. Fortunately, you know, this was last November that all 3 of these laws were overturned. We've made tremendous progress. You know, we have the wireless going into our schools. We have money going into our schools, and on their own, the technology now has become organic. And I don't think there's any way to stop it now. Now the idea, the process, or the challenge is, how do we do it in a state like Idaho and have the resources to do it? But at least there's not the resistance to the technology itself anymore as much. But you know, we had a funding system in the law that was overturned, and that's what we have to continue to work on and figure out.
We've talked about devices and connections a lot. What lessons from your efforts would come on curriculum? So you said you struggled with this a bit, Jeff, but what are the high points of what you found on deploying curriculum across the state?
I think the curriculum side of things, curriculum, pedagogy, the whole educational complex, the big challenge there is working with faculty around an understanding that there really are different ways in which you can deploy technologies and leverage them in a learning situation, some of which can lead to change and others of which will never lead to change. Unfortunately, it's the ones that don't lead to change that people seem to gravitate to first. Right? And so it's what we typically refer to as kind of substitution and augmentation styles of using technology, where you're simply doing what you always did, but you're doing it on a computer instead of doing it on paper. Right? And we have to try and remind folks, what's the definition of insanity? It's that doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Well, if you're doing the same thing just using a computer instead of paper, why would you expect a different educational outcome? Right? And so it has been the great challenge then to try and work with faculty to craft new processes. And the big challenge that comes there is a combination of, is the content ready to make that change with you? Because so much content has pedagogy embedded that ignores technology. And also because of the high stakes environment that we live in today, right? MLTI, our one-to-one program, began at the same time as NCLB. So there was this tension in the system between the federal rules coming down and saying, every child must succeed, which I think they all believed in, but you're going to be held accountable to all this high stakes testing. And at the same time, we're saying you need to change your practice. And teachers saying, well, what if it doesn't work? Right? And so leadership became a huge issue and continues to be a great challenge. That when we have educational leaders and principals who get that and who have kind of risk-taking in their bones and are willing to move with their faculty and say, you know what, we're going to take this risk because we know it's better, as I think you or someone was referencing before about Korea, just saying, well, why test it? We just know it's better, right? I know this is better. If it doesn't quite work out, I, the principal, will stand in front of the press and you can go hide in the building and I'll take all the bullets. Right? But too many faculty don't have a leader who's willing to do that, and so instead they're afraid they're just going to push me out in front of the crowd, in front of the mob, and I'm going to be the one taking all the bullets as the teacher, and that's really not fair. Right? We can't hang our teachers out to dry. So we've got to provide them the support, and we've got to provide them the leadership, and I think that's really been the critical aspect of making change in the classroom, because I think the things that teachers want to do are not necessarily things they don't know what to do about. Like they have the ideas. It really comes down to the risk-taking. And are they in an environment that allows them to take those risks? And if they're not, then you tend to just see a continuation of what they've always done.
So I think that you touched on something that is critical as you move forward and something that maybe we could have done a better job of in Idaho when we rolled this out. We talked a lot about devices in Idaho, or at least we let other people define what we were trying to do as devices. Giving every kid a laptop. You would have thought that our plan was that we give every ninth grader a laptop, and after they've had their fill of pornography, they hawk it at the nearest pawn shop, and we never see them or the laptop again. I mean, that's how this whole thing was spun, and we lost control of the message. What we should focus on, and I think the way you engage and get support of educators and parents, is you show them all of these tools that are available. Then they're going to want to know, how do I get access to that? Well, you have to have a device, and you have to have connectivity, and you have to have broadband support for that connectivity. But if the focus is just on a device, then I think you're making a mistake. And don't let others define it as a device. And so the question was about curriculum. What we've found is that once educators realize the freedom that this creates, because they're not limited by just one curriculum or one textbook. There's open source curriculum, there's open source periodicals, all kinds of information that they can go out. We have some teachers in Idaho that are actually using a publisher type of an app and creating their own textbooks for their own classrooms, right? They go out and they find the content, they know what they want aligned to their lesson plans. The other thing that we recognize is that with the proper implementation of technology, learning isn't limited by school walls, it's not limited by school calendars or by bell schedules, it's not limited by the local staff's endorsements or certificates, and it's definitely not limited by geography. It means that learning can happen anywhere at any time. And that's the benefit that comes from the proper implementation of technology. And once the users and the parents and the educators realize that, then everything that has to happen to make that possible is acceptable.
Tom, there's been a sense of the states closing in on curriculum, making it difficult for technology to be adopted. How have you broken through that and basically freed up the educators to make their own decisions?
Well, in Idaho, the local districts have always chosen the curriculum. They choose the textbooks. The teachers develop their own lesson plans. So the state doesn't choose the curriculum or the textbooks. It's always been a local decision. You'd be surprised how many school board members in Idaho don't know that, right? And so there's, but the fact is, it's still part of the education system in Idaho, and even even with Common Core, there's been some resistance that since Idaho has chosen to participate in Common Core, that this local control of curriculum and textbook adoption is going to be lost, and so we've been really emphasizing that. What we need to do is make sure that those who make those decisions at the local level, again, realize how much more freedom and choices they have with the proper implementation of technology.
I want to end on a more upbeat note here, because we've spent an awful lot of time today talking about the challenges. So the two of you have focused a lot of your career, a lot of your personal reputation on this issue with much success. What is it that keeps you motivated, and as you go around your state, convinces you that this is the right thing for the kids in your state?
I think, as some folks have mentioned before, when you walk into a school and you visit a classroom and see the levels of engagement and talk to kids, that's what really keeps you going. We do an annual event that we call simply the annual student conference. It's actually the biggest conference that occurs in Maine of any industry all year. 1,000 kids show up with their devices at the University of Maine. And one of the things we do is we have speakers, student speakers. And we have kids who come in to talk about what they've done and what the technology's allowed them to do, whether it was school-driven or not. And hearing from some of these kids, one girl came in talking about a program she created that essentially created a pen pal between kids in Iraq and other Middle Eastern countries and kids in Maine, because she saw a need to make that bridge and that connection because the communication wasn't occurring. And she's now at Stanford University studying Arabic because she thinks that maybe she can help with Middle East peace, right? Two girls who in Machias, Maine, the third poorest county in Maine, or third poorest county in the country, who then decided, well, we want to learn Japanese. So they went online, found a Japanese program that they could learn Japanese. They're now both at Bates College on full ride scholarships, right? Because they just took the initiative, because we simply gave them the opportunity, and then as the adults need to do, get out of the way, right? One of the things that we often talk about for our program is the notion that structure should liberate, not confine, right? So we provide a lot of structure in saying, here's devices, here's a network, here's how you get these things repaired, here's the base software image. But after that, you can do whatever you want to do. Tom?
Yeah, I think it's like Jeff said, it's the kids, right? The best part of my job is going into the classroom and visiting with children and students and young adults, and every one of them have big dreams. Every one of them see themselves doing great things. I just feel the obligation to make sure that they have the same opportunity that I've had and that you've had to live whatever their version of the American dream is. And today in Idaho, we have good schools. Over 90% of our kids graduate from high school in Idaho, right? And so one of our challenges is going from good to great, because we've become very comfortable with good. But when I see students and recognize, I see myself in them in many ways, right? Where I was as a young man. I can remember living in a tent for a while. I can only imagine what some of my educators must have thought. But the fact is that education today is far more important than it was even when I was growing up. And we have to make sure that children, no matter where they live in Idaho or anywhere in the country, have the same opportunity and access. And it just stands to reason that technology is going to play an important role in that. It took 20 years to get the overhead projector out of the bowling alley and into the classroom, right? And we always just seem to be a generation or two behind, but I really think that this is the moment. The connectivity is there, the technology is there, the price point is there. This kind of a conference and the people that are here, what the conversations going on about E-rate, the support of the president and governors across this country are going to be critical. But that's what motivates me. I think this is one of the most exciting times to be involved in education in America, and we can do this. There's no doubt that we can do this. I'm convinced of that.
I want to thank the two of you, first of all, for being leaders both in policy and deployment. Not only talking about it, but getting it done, and secondly, for continuing to be cheerleaders for the effort around the country by attending events like this. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.